Without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce Jon Pelham. I'm going to have John Bowman introduce Jon Pelham for this presentation for food plant guilds for our butterflies. So thank you all for being here.
And thank you, Mary, for allowing me the honor to introduce John. I feel somewhat unworthy about this because I've been such a figurehead presence in WABA for the last year or so. But for those points at which I was very active, John was a tireless and enthusiastic fan of our little group here, of my efforts in particular, and for all area lepidopterists, people wanting to know how to identify certain species, what sorts of habitats in which to find them, and as we have coming up tonight, the plant guilds on which they might be found. He is broadly published in scientific literature about butterflies and is the author of an exhaustive catalog of all North American butterfly species. And he is keeping us up to date on all of the latest things on taxonomy. And that is no easy job. So I hope we have a chance to reconnect with John in field trips. I hope that we have a chance to have in-person WBA meetings again. That is how I first met John. I came over for a presentation by Bob Pyle, and after I was getting ready to leave, Jon Pelham, none other than John, found out that I was from Eastern Washington and practically followed me out to my car in the parking lot to suggest ways I might find butterflies and stay in touch. And I have been grateful, very deeply grateful for that kind of enthusiasm and dedication to his dedication to WABA membership in general ever since. So without further ado, here is Jon Pelham, our science advisor.
All righty, I'm gonna do this and see, is that coming across? Is there something that I can do, make it clearer, or do you see that?
It works.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I see. I need to get something straightened around here.
You might want full screen mode.
Okay, so while I do that, guys, help me out.
Well, it looks like it's already full screen mode, but do you have to click on slideshow so that?
That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
But see, that's why I rely on everyone else. You know, this is an important function of having people around that know more than you, which is unfortunately for me, a lot more people. First of all, you're much too gracious, John. I am just a guy that happens to be crazy for butterflies. And I share that atmosphere with a few others tonight, and I'm glad to be in your company, Zoom company. I am mortified that I don't get the opportunity to be face-to-face, but even more upset that we don't get to exchange, questions and answers. And so that's the thing that I'm going to have to worry about as time goes on. All right. There's something not right here, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but maybe it won't matter. I know what it is. I can't see the chat.
It's true that when you're presenting, you can't see the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
But maybe Mary can interpret for you, or you can pause once in a while to so Mary can read the chat.
Okay.
One of us can
or
tell you
John.
when questions pop up. You could tell us, John, if you want to take the questions as they come, or make pause at certain points to see what the chat is offering for you to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. That might be the best way to go. All right. We'll go to the title page, which is just a chance to talk about what we're considering a guild. These guilds are not exactly an ecological term that's widespread. I've seen it in the literature, and I've talked to a lot of people that use them, use the name. But what they amount to is a given species of plant, a given species of plant that supports at least 3 species of butterfly. There's quite a few species of plants like Viola trinervata that exploits or is exploited by the Coronis fertilary, and that relationship is very tight and it's exclusive. That is not a guild. It's interesting, it's fascinating, but it's not a guild. So a plant that supports these species is a distinct community of butterflies in an ecosystem. That is to say, when you walk into a habitat, you're able to look at these plants and see this relationship in that community, and they usually are exclusive. You know, the other communities, other plant communities, other butterfly groups and assemblages are not associated with that plant. This is actually a distinct group of relationships. So we will, you know, look at that as we go along and see those more clearly. And it's also important that the plant be durable and or persistent and or luxuriant. Luxuriant, I guess, needs definition, you know, capable of supporting, you know, the life cycle of a butterfly. And in the case of a guild plant, it's got to be able to do that over time, because most often the butterflies that occur on these plants are not simultaneous. You know, one may be early in the spring, one may be later in the spring, early summer, and then some even late into the summer. So that's an important feature. And then a plant that has these characteristics also has to be widely enough spread so that it's not like an extremely localized phenomenon. Okay, another thing that's important to remember is that a guild fruit plant need not support all of these members at any time or place. You might go someplace where one of these plants is only available to 2 or 3 out of 5, for example, species in that habitat. So it's kind of a loose assemblage, but it's something that's it's certainly worth knowing when you go into the field, and it's probably going to become more in vogue. Okay, so like I'm going to eliminate some plants that are not considered guild plants. Violets per se. I mean, Fritz, greater Fritz and lesser Fritz use violets widely. These are a number of different species of both plants and butterflies. So violets don't form guilds, generally speaking. And then, of course, the Brassicaceae, the marbles, whites, and orange tips on various mustards. And they're very Catholic in their tastes. Most of the whites that we have food plant records for have 5, 6, or 7 species listed, and they may use more than one at any given time in any given place. So, mustards are not, no mustard is a part of a food plant guild. And then last, alfalfa, a butterfly food plant for sure, a multitude of blues, sulfurs and a gray hair streak, but it is, not exclusive, and it's really hard to say that would, form a guild. Although, I mean, somebody could argue that, it is a guild food plant. I'm not going to make that argument. Okay, so here's the rundown of the taxa that we're going to look at tonight. And you can see that at the bottom end, we have 3 species, associated with mallows, and at the top end, we have 8 species associated with mountain balm, and it runs all the way, down the gamut. So we'll return to that if you need to, but we'll just go right into it right away. The following 3 plants are all mallows, and I'm going to group them all together because they support the same 3 butterflies wherever they occur. And it's important to recognize that it's rare, in fact, unlikely that any of these will be found together, although globe mallows, could occur, it'd be kind of a weedy plant, so they could be, adjacent one or the other. This is one of my favorite plants of all time. It is a distinctly xeric steppe plant, and it's amazing. And that's an amazing photograph. Most of them look more like that, but it's a late summer plant, mid to late summer plant, and the larvae will use the plant before it's in bloom. I discovered it by going from one riparian corridor to another and seeing this, horribly orange thing that looked like somebody left something out. And I went to investigate, and I said, holy cow, this is a plant. And it supports three species reliably, very often on the same plant at the same time. And this is a globe, or cheeseweed, I guess not globe mallow, sorry. Cheeseweed, and of course, you guys probably recognize this as a weedy plant that's found in lots, adjacent railroad tracks, backyards. It's a pretty widespread plant, but it also supports these three species and quite nicely. And then this, it's a stream bank, which kind of gives away, where it occurs. It's a forest dwelling plant, or at least at the lower end, and it supports the same three species. And so it's wise to be aware of these things. I'm going to go over them again. This is a plant you should definitely try to find out there in Lincoln County, because it's going to support the three species that we're going to talk about. Okay, so yeah, right. These are those three species: the common checkered skipper, which is widespread and uses other plants; the northern white skipper, which actually really favors these three plants, one of these three; and the West Coast lady, which will use just about any mallow, but in more rural areas occurs in association with one of these three because they're more natural. If you get a West Coast lady out in the Columbia Basin, it's so almost assuredly using Monroe's mallow, what do they call it? Monroe's globe mallow. Yeah, that's it. So let's just go ahead and take a look at those. And this is, a brief rundown. Everybody likes pretty pictures, and just in case somebody doesn't know what these skippers, are, that is our common checkered skipper. I had to look to make sure because I wanted to call it Burnsius communis. This is the large white skipper, or whatever I call it, northern white skipper. Yeah, right. And the West Coast lady. These are, basically the lowest level of gill formation that we're going to deal with tonight. And I think I looked for others and didn't really come to the conclusion that there is another three species plant, but that is a good place to start. Okay, so stinging nettles. Now, last time I gave this presentation, Stuart alerted me to the fact that, we should probably consider stinging nettle a gilled plant, and he convinced me. I think that it is. I can't hear anybody laugh at my joke, Urtica will hurt you, but it's I heard somebody laugh. Great. So in Washington, we have rather interesting situation where west of the Cascades, we have one variety of Urtica dioica, and the stinging nettle, and east of the Cascades, we have another. Now, Western Washington, our nettles are just nice. They're juicy and big leaves, and you make a salad out of that, and it's just like great, 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 great. I mean, come on, tell me that doesn't look edible, all right? Eastern Washington, oh, ouch. Each. Oof. They're hairier and they sting harder, and but they are durable. And that's one of the things that I want to mention is that in Western Washington, nettles go through a two-stage life cycle. The first stage is a leaf stage. The second stage is a blooming stage, and they can actually have times and places where there's kind of like not much going on. The nettles kind of dehisce or senesce and go away. Eastern Washington, your nettles are tough boogers. Now that looks like a tough booger. I mean, it looks tough, and it is. And there's a lot of places in Lincoln County, Grant County, where long riparian corridors, these are present all year long, and that's an important function of being a gill plant. All right, so there's 4 species associated with it, and I bet you didn't know the West Coast lady was one of those. Well, the West Coast lady does. It's not one that you often will find associated with nettles, but it's often enough that I had to include it. And the other 3, on the other hand, are obligate. They just are only on the nettles. And you guys know the Milbert's tortoiseshell, that larva, and you guys the satyr anglewing. Nobody said anything about angle comma. That's my made up thing. I couldn't figure out whether to call them anglewing or satyr comma, so I just said, hey, get the best of both. And then, of course, the West Coast lady again. And our favorite, admirable. These are pretty reliable association, at least the three of them. The West Coast lady, not so much, but more or less, if you're looking at nettles and you come across a West Coast lady, it won't surprise you now. And then the next is bearberry, more boreal plant, and a plant that is common, widespread. It actually supports quite a few butterfly species. Not every place, not always at the same time, but it's reliable enough for at least 2 out of these 4 in a lot of different places. Although Freya, guys are pretty lucky to even see Freya. Although Cheryl could probably take us to some places where you can see them, but. Now I'm going to mention this because in later on we'll have a conversation about myrmecophily. Myrmecophily comes from 2 Greek words, myrmex and phyllis, and that's what it is ants, love of ants, or ants love, or something like that. But the brown elfin and the echo azure larvae are associated with ants, and this will at least I predict it'll play a role later on. When we talk about how these assemblages form. So the hoary elfin is also a butterfly who could actually be a myrmecophilus, but we haven't ever discovered that. So, and John, I think a couple of folks on the presentation have actually seen the polios, the hoary elfin.
Mhm.
It's much commoner in the Northeast than it is anywhere else in Eastern Washington. And it's only local in Western Washington. So, and its association with Arctostaphylos uva-ursi is absolute. And then azures, they are fruit fleeters. And this is something that, you need to kind of consider when you're looking at butterfly food plants. There's a number of butterflies that utilize only the fruits and or flowering parts of the plant. And those will have advantage in some senses, but a restriction in other senses. It's like the fruits are very, very fleshy, reliable sources of nutrition and abundant nutrition. However, they are extremely limited in a time frame, so you really have to target them pretty well. A lot of people don't realize that echo azures will use Arctostaphylos, and that's because most of the time echo azures are flying 2 to 3 to 5 to 8 feet off the ground, and you wouldn't see that association very clearly. But when you go in and you beat Arctostaphylos, you'll not only get brown elfins and hoary elfins, but you'll get these echo azure larvae as well. So that's something to keep an eye on. Of course, echoes will use a lot of different food plants, and so it's not unusual. Although I would say that in places where they're using Arctostaphylos, that's pretty much the only plant that's available to them. So it's a real fundamental part of that guild. This is the special one. I included it because A, it's a pretty butterfly. B, we have it, and C, it is associated with Arctostaphylos, with kinnikinnick, and I like being complete. Okay, next up is antelope brush. And antelope brush is a plant that is really familiar to people along the east slope of the Cascades. Tends to thin out a little bit as you go further east or deeper into the Columbia Basin, but it's extant in a number of places adjacent to the Spokane-Columbia River conjoinment on either side of the river. Number of colonies I've examined in Lincoln County, and I know Gene Damerel has as well, maybe some other people here as well too. So if there are any questions, you feel free to butt in now. Because if you don't, I'll keep talking.
We do have one on the chat.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Here in Western Oregon, the common checkered skipper and West Coast lady are using checker mallow.
Right. Both of those would use various mallows, and so that's not surprising. Yeah.
Before you showed us the bitter brush, you showed us a butterfly, but you didn't tell us what it was.
Oh, Freya fritillary. Sorry.
That was what I guessed.
Yeah. Right. No, that's fine. I mean, I sometimes when I go lickety split, I jump the rail here. So it's useful to remind me. So here we are, this bitter brush. And now this is an interesting plant. I love it. You know, it's great plant. It's an indicator plant. It's very limited in its distribution altitudinally. You know, along the east slope of the Cascades, it doesn't penetrate far into the steppe, and it doesn't penetrate far into the forest. It kind of runs around following the edge of the forest steppe ecotone. But in that area, it is a profound element in that ecosystem, and it has 4 butterflies. All of them myrmecophilous, all of them and associated. And it's really an amazing thing to actually go out into these places and well, especially for Bear's hairstreak and California hairstreak, they can be flying around on the same bush, and you can see a number of them. They can be oftentimes very common. You know, earlier on, you'll see brown elephants, you know, hanging around. And gray hair streaks, they eat a lot of things. They're, again, fruit feeders. So like they're just thrown in on account of that. That's one of the plants that we repeatedly get them from. And that's 4, you know, that's 4 species. Now, I love this larva of the brown elephant. What you can't really tell from the image is that 3-dimensionally, those are like angled plates. They're kind of shingled over one another. They have a 3-dimensional quality to them, and they're variously colored. You can see there's pink to some degree. Well, that pink can expand to actually cover those white areas with almost a pale red color, and they're shiny. So they're really spectacular creatures. This is, you know, a caterpillar which is actually cryptic. If you were to actually go to the Persia plant and physically inspect the plant, these things will line up on the underside of the leaves, and you can. I mean, the first one I ever found, not beating, you know, because we beat them and we, you know, find them falling out underneath the plant. But if you're actually physically searching them, the first one I ever found, I actually put my finger on. You know, it's like, oh, that leaf is a little thicker than it should be. And there it was. So it's cryptic, you know, very cryptic. But all of these are ant associated.
That last one, name again?
This one here,
Yeah,
oh, Bear's hair streak.
I thought so, but I didn't hear it.
Yeah, you know, I see. I expect you guys to, you know, like make up for my deficiencies. I know that's a lot to make up for, but hey. All right, and this last one is California hair streak. And very interesting thing about this one, aside from it has an interesting looking larva, is that if you go into an area and you're doing your inventory work and you beat a Persia bush, you will get, you know, like a myriad, you know, geometrid larvae, a myriad number of noctua larvae, and, you know, then a couple of, you know, your Bear's hair streaks and a couple of you know, gray hair streaks or what have you. This one will not. These larvae hold on, and so like it's a very interesting thing. I remember when David and David did their book, they were having a hard time finding larvae, so they had to rear them from egg to even get the full life history. So we'll move on. One of my favorite plants of all is a coyote willow. The 2 reasons, of course, one is the number of butterfly species that it supports over a large area, including most of Western US, and the fact that it's pretty distinctive. This image isn't so much so, but that one is. They oftentimes have a very, very frosty appearance, and they're visible and identifiable from a distance. The number of species that occur on this willow is pretty large, and they're, you know, one of them is myrmecophilous, but it doesn't seem to be associated with any other myrmecophilous larvae, you know, so like it's not maybe significant, but it's very frequent that this is the plant you find, you know, the you know, outbreaks of Nymphalis California, the morning cloak. It's a widely used plant for lorquins, admirals, and viceroys. Basically, as far as I can tell, and, you know, from the data that I have, it's the only plant that we've recorded viceroys on in Washington. But that's probably not, you know, the only plant it uses. It's just that that's the way we went. And tiger swallowtails use willows of all sorts. And the interesting thing about its use of the coyote willow is that it's able to exploit more xeric habitats, because the coyote willow is quite capable itself of exploiting xeric habitats. And so it's found deeper into these dry habitats on account of the fact that it has such a sustainable food plant. So that's one measure. Sylvan hair streaks. These are so tied to these willows that as you go down a road in well, like Kittitas County, which is our bailiwick, you see these willows off to the side of the road, and these you stop, you know, because you know that these hair streaks. Well, I mean, if it's July, these hair streaks are going to be, you know, found in association with them. And so like that is a fundamental association. Now you get into forested habitats, and they use a number of other willows. Unfortunately, they don't appear to perch on them, and we don't really know what those willows are. You know, James Nunnally did some speculation, but we've never really determined for sure. I mean, you can kind of exclude, it's a willow feeder throughout its range. So it's some willow species. So if you're in a habitat and there's only two, then it's got to be one of the two that it's using, or maybe both. But at least with regard to the coyote willow, that is, you know, it's like almost a signpost. If you see, you know, the coyote willow, you know, out in Grant County in an otherwise, you know, or treeless habitat, a riparian community or around one of those pothole lakes, it's always worth a stop, you know, to go out there and look and see. And very frequently you will, you know, score the Sylvans. And of course, you know, everyone knows Lorquin, you know, guy came to California and looking for gold, and he found butterflies and sent them back to Bois de Val. One of them got named for him, Lorquin's Admiral. Morning cloak. You guys know why morning cloaks are named morning cloaks? It's because the yellow is poking out from underneath the morning dress. All right. I just borrowed that from somebody else. And then, of course, the viceroy. Now, one thing about viceroy larvae, which I just feel you have to measure, and Lorquin's, you know, larvae is too. They basically, to start with, kind of look like something indigestible and maybe even something recently defecated. More than that, though, in real life, they're kind of shiny. So they look like freshly defecated. You know, like these are not really good looking to eat. And you know, I guess maybe some people would say some of them actually aren't good because there's salicylic acid that they sequester from the willows. But anyway, that's it for that one. Now, this is something that's like pretty much West Side, guys. And I beg your pardon for, you know, like bringing the West to the East. I know you guys could use a little of our water right now, but there's two plants that we haven't been able to successfully distinguish because they are very similar, and I'm not a botanist. But it seems regardless. Yeah, any more questions? It seems that both of them are used by the same group of species. So I'm going to continue, consider them just a single plant for the purpose of discussion. Yeah, you can see they're kind of different looking, but hey, you know, I can't tell in the field especially. And when most of the butterflies are flying, they are relatively early in their growth phase, and so they don't have a lot of the characteristics. So this hosts northern clouded wing, which is always a great butterfly. I don't know if you guys get them very often, you know, way in the East. I know there's a few records, but they're not a really common butterfly. You know, silver spotted skippers are not really common either, but they are not using, you know, the either of these Hosakia. I can't remember. They changed the name on me. It used to be Lotus, and Hosakia just doesn't roll off the tongue. Perseus dusky wing, again, that's largely a West Side. Melanus, you'll see the gray hair streak show up just everywhere, and that's because it eats almost anything, as long as it's got fruits or flowers. And then, of course, the bramble green elfin. I apologize profusely. No, I don't. We have green elfins as a kind of a novelty name. You have Polios, you know, Insisalia or Colophorus polios, and brown elfins, and, you know, hoary elfins, and all those are elfins, and they don't have tails. You have cedar hair streaks, and you have mistletoe hair streaks. They got hair streaks. So why do we have a green hair streak that doesn't have a hair streak? So I call it an elfin. I realize that I'm pressing the limits of most people's capacity to tolerate, but that's what I do. Okay. I hear a satellite beacon or something. You guys hear me still?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, so these are basically the skippers that use that plant, and as you can see, these are skippers that fold leaves, and so this plant actually is pretty good for them because it's longitudinal. They can fold the leaf over them. In early instars, they roll it, and in bigger later instars, they actually silk several of them together. So it's a good plant, you know, in terms of durability, you know, sustainability, and in terms of its structure, enabling these skippers to make their little retreats. The gray hair streaks, again, they don't care, but you see that little ant down there? What do you think he's doing? Well, he's tickling. Now, we have actually, in our state, a rich history of lepidoptery. And in this particular case, the gland that is being stimulated by that ant is called Newcomer's gland. And my mentor in Yakima, when I went to school in Yakima, my mentor was Ervil J. Newcomer, who discovered and described that organ. And he is, you know, like, you know, he was the guru of Washington butterflies at one time. And, you know, my mentor and I, you know, like, I can't tell you how many field trips I went on with him, right? But that gland that produces that substance that attracts that ant, and actually that attraction and that relationship is fundamentally important to both. Although I think the caterpillar gets more than the ant gets. I personally think that the amount of substance produced by these caterpillars as a reward for the ants tending them is minuscule in terms of nutritional value. There's some evidence to suggest that it is mimicking some queen pheromones or some other communication pheromones, and so it has you know, a meaning beyond just nutrition. I had an idea that it was actually a drug effect, and I'm not sure that that's accurate either. And again, then the bramble green hair streak or green elephant. See, I did it myself, you know. Now, east of the crest, but still pretty much west, you know, in and around Sadis Pass. John, you were up there with us at Sadis Pass, right? At the WABA conference, right? That is a plant that we saw up there. I like to call it cow pie lotus, but it's in a different genus now. And so, like, if you see enough of this in this image, you see enough of these strewn over the landscape from a distance, they kind of look like cow pies. They're prostrate to the ground, and they're profuse. They're very, very common. It has all of the same species as their more western counterparts, but adding two. And especially interesting is the Melissa blue, because in places where the Melissas are using this plant, they're kind of, you know, a far piece away from alfalfa fields or the lower elevation populations. They kind of exist on their own. We haven't proved it, but we think they're facultatively single brooded in these places. So this is a really interesting association, but that's a large number of species to be found on that plant. And of course, you've seen these. We went through that. I repeat. This is silvery blue larva. And again, you got those ants doing their thing, all right? And I, of course, included these ants so that we would have this as a topic for conversation. And this is a Melissa. It also attracts ants, but I couldn't find one with an ant hanging out. All right, so now we get to the gnums. Now these are really spectacular plants in terms of how important they are to the butterflies that use them. Now, there's a lot of Eriogonums that don't really have butterflies associated with them. And the ones that do have a lot of butterflies associated with them. This is one of the lower number of the plants that, of the Eriogonum plants. It has a relatively fewer number of species. So I'm going to have to explain something here. Blue coppers, everybody knows. Western green elephants, we've already been through the elephant thing. Sahaptin blue, this is an unnamed population that specializes, you know, in using Sphirocephalum, the the plant we're talking about now, and another one which no other butterfly uses at all. But we think it's going to be described. We think it's a distinct species. We're getting the genomic work done on it now, and it's kind of exciting. They're very local in the Kittitas, Grant County, Douglas County area. They don't get very far east, and they really don't get very far west. It's a very, very restricted range. But I was so proud of Melanie, because one day she came back and she had a picture of a buckwheat blue, and she said, "This is different." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." And she noticed it. So like, we don't do taxonomy tonight, and maybe that'll be something that I can do in the future. We can talk about, some of the intricacies of identification, or how hard it is to identify. But this Apton blue uses this plant with all these others, and often in the same place. Mormon metal marks are, if they're associated with ants, it's minimally, and no, I haven't observed it, but then I have never found a larva. So that, it goes with the territory. Blue cobbers use a lot of different buckwheats. They're actually most of the ones that we'll list tonight. They don't use a lot of the buckwheats that no other butterflies use either. So it is interesting that there must be something about these buckwheats that are used that make them attractive. And I suspect it may have something to do with, what we'll talk about a little later. The Western green elfin, is widely spread in central Washington, but it occurs in rather specialized habitats. So, it'd be a long time from one colony to the next, but there's lots of colonies. Again, it's an anassociate, and it is an often close association with Sheridan's hair streak. And so like both of them can be found adjacent one another, one in the gulches below the hilltops where the other is found. So, there's our Sahapton blue and somebody's hand. That's not a food plant, I don't think, although the blue looks like it might be thinking about it. The basic discriminator here is the bluish white ground color and the heavy black spotting, especially on the forewing, where that one row of spots is almost fused together into a band. But, that's neither here nor there for the purposes of this conversation. And then lupin blues. Now, we discriminate lupin blues from Acmon blues on the basis of a number of features, which are not 100% reliable. Nothing is always. But these are also discriminable on the basis of the fact that lupin blues are single brooded. So if you get an Acmonoid blue in August, it's an Acmon, very likely, unless you're on top of Slate Peak, which of course you guys did last year. But the point is that this blue is highly adapted to a lot of buckwheats, and Acmon will actually use other plants. So we'll see that a little bit later. But and then of course the Mormon metal mark. Isn't that a cool larva? I mean, that's purple and orange. And that's like, all right, I'm with that. Almost looks like a mini nymphalid spiny caterpillar. Okay, another gnome, northern buckwheat. Now I'm going to tell you right now, the reason why this plant is so good for the butterflies that use it is apparent in this image, right? If you're a leaf feeder, look at those leaves, lots of them, and they're big. If you're a flower feeder or a fruit feeder, look at those flower heads, they're monstrous. This is a plant that, any butterfly that is going to use buckwheats would target in a minute. And it does have a number of it's one of the higher guild numbers for our guild plants. The blue coppers again, Sheridan's green hair streak, Columbia blue. This is a primary food plant for the Columbia blue. And in fact, you can almost bet if you're a place where that buckwheat is present at the right time of year and there's a blue flying around it, it's very likely a Columbia blue. And again, lupin blue, and again, Mormon metal mark. And again, all but the Mormon are known myrmecophiles. And now that's a Sheridan's hair streak. I don't know if we looked at it before. It's not a great example. I picked one that had like, sort of a major league, spot or band on the ventral hind wing to contrast it with that. Not great. Western green elfins will be less spotted generally, and Sheridans will be more spotted generally. But I would say there's probably a residue of 15 to 20% that would be really hard to identify by a photo alone. And then there's the Colombian blue. Larvae are totally cool. They're flower feeders, and they eat flowers. They change colors as the flowers senesce, largely due to the ingestion of the flower pigments. This is not an unusual thing in licaniid larvae. It is a very useful thing if you're a larva trying to avoid being eaten. But they're heavily ant attended. And so if you're in a place where you come across like a northern buckwheat, and it's, like it's July, late July, past the flight period of the Columbia blue, and you stick your nose down in those senescing flower heads and look for ants. The ants will be all over these things, and they'll lead you right to the caterpillar. And they're always cool to see. I mean, you can kind of see their nice pastel colors. They're really kind of cool animals. And then lupin blues, once again. And a Mormon meadowlark, once again. Now, I don't know who gave this name to this buckwheat. I took it from the Burke website. And since I work for those guys, I figure I better, honk them. So parsley buckwheat and Heracleoides. We have a butterfly that is going to be described sometime in the next 6 months that uses this plant. We call it the Cascadia blue, and it's going to be named, well, I can't tell you because it's, a secret. You can't give a name before it's been given. And we'll have that name, and we're all happy about that. It's a pretty distinctive plant, pretty widespread. People can recognize them by these little stages like these things in the centerpiece of the flowering stalk. Very few other buckwheats have them, and very, very few Heracleoides or parsley buckwheats don't have them. So it's another plant that's pretty luscious. I mean, it's got, some stuff going for it. It's not a pittance. It's, it's a plant worth targeting, and it gets. Most of the same that we just had. This time we add the Akmon blue, and that's the problem. I just now noticed that I had a misspelling here. The problem with Akmon blues is that they will eat a lot of different things, and we haven't recorded them from all the things that they would eat. But so like we're going to go through looking at all the same ones we just looked at because I'm just being thorough. And then we get, oh, wait a minute. I did not include Akmon blue. I had it somewhere, but I misplaced it. That's too bad. Not that you could tell from looking at a picture, but hey. Then the tall buckwheat. And this presents a different aspect. In some ways, you can see these basal leaves are ginormous, and they would, like leaf-eating butterflies would be able to really luxuriate. But if you look at their flower heads, it's like, whoa, they're kind of little and dinky, and like not a whole lot of biomass there. The one thing that this plant has going for it that, all the buckwheats we have talked about till now is it lasts forever. It starts blooming. Well, at Reister Creek, where we have, long-term inventories, it starts blooming in late June and it blooms into September. So if you're a flower feeding butterfly, then you have the opportunity to exploit these flowers over a longer period of time. Whereas if you're using one of these other, buckwheats, yeah, they're really luxuriant, but man, that's a short window. You better take advantage of it. And if you emerge late, like if your pupa was under the tree or under a snowbank and you emerge and that plant's gone, you're just up the creek, so to speak. Up the creek, so to speak. Don't quote me. So this is a plant that actually is very, very profuse. It supports a large number of butterflies, and very frequently in the same place, like Lower Reister Creek. We have not actually gotten Western green elfins at Lower Reister Creek, but everything else on that list, yes. And it's a plant that, because of its durability and because of its adaptation to more xeric habitats, can actually support a large number of butterflies that, than other areas, other area organisms that occur in steppe habitats. So, oh, I get it. No, I don't. I just made an error. All right, so you blue, copper, green, hair streak, Sharon, green, yeah, Colombier, and there we go, the lupin, Mormo. So that's a fairly large number of butterflies on one straggly looking plant. Now, they call it the tall buckwheat because it is. It's, like actually when you're in the field, and many of you have seen these, they stick up off the ground quite a ways. And when you get into the right kind of place, you'll have a whole field full of these things, or what you call a stony dry meadow. And these plants extend so far off the ground, the blooming heads are off the ground. It almost looks as if there's a pink haze floating over the ground. And they can be so numerous. And all right, okay. All right. Now this is the king. This is the king. This plant speaks for itself. I mean, if you're a flower feeder, what's not to like about that picture? If you're a leaf feeder, what's not to like about that picture? It's like, this is a plant that has it all, and it is exploited by a lot. You have the flower heads that turn into seed heads. So you have, if you're a flower feeder and a flower seed feeder, then you have a long time, where these plants actually stay in seed. You've probably seen these plants with no flowers and nothing but seed heads sitting there. And, caterpillars don't care. They'll eat the seeds. It's fine. It's a wonderful plant. I love it to death. And it has a lot of butterflies. And they're actually pretty common on this plant. Now, in Washington, the Pacuvius dusky wing is largely confined to this plant. Now, John, I think it was 6 years ago, found an association with, I think, Integerunus, another Ceanothus species. And I wouldn't be surprised that it would use another species if it was available to them. I don't think that they're restricted. But if you're looking looking to find Pacuvius, the first place you look for is a place that has a lot of Ceanothus velutinus, the snowbrush. Well, now that's another question I have. I got mountain balm and snowbrush. Mountain balm is what they smell like. Snowbrush is what they look like. So anyway, pale swallowtails, they really, this is what they call a keystone food plant for them in eastern Washington. They will use, bitter cherry. They'll use choke cherry. They'll use other plants on occasion, like serviceberry, but they really thrive on mountain balm. And same with brown elfins. There's a lot of places where you'll go, and brown elfins will be the brown elfin Ceanothus association will be so profound that we've not recovered any brown elfin larvae on any other plant, even though they are more Catholic and they will use other plants. We haven't, found them. It's almost like that. Hey, what the heck? Let's specialize on this plant. The hedgerow hair streak, on the other hand, is a Ceanothus obligate, and we know that they will use other Ceanothus, but by and large, other Ceanothus species in our state just don't attain the abundance of the mountain balm. The California hair streak is not necessarily using Ceanothus often, but it's frequent enough that you encounter it, and it's we've actually gotten larvae off of the plants, and they certainly will eat it in the lab. So it's one of those. Now the Echo Azure has a relationship with this plant that's almost exactly like that of the brown elfin. They will use that plant almost exclusively in places where it predominates, and it's there's times in the spring where if you find a grove of these plants adjacent a roadside with some mud, like the Tank Road off Reeser Creek, you can see, literally hundreds of these butterflies hanging around this plant and or mudding. And Lorquin's admiral will use it as well. And then, of course, it's a primary food plant, or ceanothus is for California tortoiseshells. But again, because mountain balm is the most common, ceanothus in the state, that is the most common, plant that California tortoiseshells use. All right, so these leaf, rolling skippers, almost all the spread wing skippers will roll a leaf for a larval shelter. And so leaf shape does play an important part of how they're going to, get by on a plant. And ceanothus is perfect because you don't need to do much more than just, start threading strands of silk across the edges of the leaf and ever tightening it. And pretty soon, you'll have a shelter. Pale swallowtails, everyone knows what they are. Did you know their larvae look just like rudderless larvae, just like the western tiger larvae? I bet you did. Hedgerow hair streaks, one of my favorites. These I actually can find pretty easily. If you go out there in the right time of the year, you just watch ants. They'll walk up and down the stems. They'll walk one way, turn one way, walk the other way a little farther, and pretty soon they'll beeline to the larva. And then by the time they get there might be 5 or 10 ants in attendance already, and they line up. So yeah, that's a pretty profound relationship. And then of course, California tortoiseshells. I have on my phone a movie I took of Caitlin Labarre down at Three Creek Meadows in Oregon from 2019. We walked into a concentration of California tortoiseshells that was, it was immense. It was, hard to believe that there'd be that many butterflies in any one place. And she started dancing around and acting all silly and everything like Snoopy, and it was classic because it was an amazing. Of course, as she was dancing around, clouds of tortoiseshells were flying up all around. So it was a pretty amazing sight. But this plant is, it's the modus operandi for the state. So we're going to talk about, myrmecophily now. Myrmecophily exists as a function of the caterpillar producing a substance that the ant wants, whether it's, for sustenance, which is dubious because the amounts are so low, or because it's a treat. It could be just a treat. It's a tasty treat that has, it touches the ants' sensory organs in such a way that they desire it. It could be a mimic of a communication hormone, pheromone. It could be a cheat. It could be something that the caterpillars produce just to, keep the ants off their backs. So at any rate, when the ants are hanging around caterpillars like that, they have a tendency to keep away other predators, except Snoopy butterfly collectors. And so that's an important thing for those creatures able to sustain a relationship with ants. Now, one of the questions I got before was, is there any value to the plant, in terms of the ants being attracted, to the larvae? The idea being that if ants are attracted to the plant for the larvae, do they perform other functions like pollination or whatnot? I have not been able to determine so. I don't know, what that would mean. I could project that the ants would predate other insects that don't produce a substance that gratifies them. So it's possible that by these caterpillars attracting ants to the bush, the ants ant densities then would be contribute to reducing pests on that plant. But that's just a guess. All right, so what's the big deal about all these myrmecophiles associated with especially buckwheats? Well, it's actually kind of simple if you think about it. The presence of one myrmecophilous species on a plant invites more because you already have an extant association that you would otherwise have to evolve independently. One less adjustment required, but the plant still has to meet the standard. Okay, so I'm going to stop here because I suspect there's questions that need to be asked, but I do need to reiterate, I miss seeing y'all. Zoom is fine, but man, I'm telling you, you would have all these questions and I'd be trying to answer them, and there would be this interchange, and that is really valuable to me. If I could tell you how many times during presentations in the past that we had questions asked that were significant, the kind that make you go, and not only significant in terms of not being able to answer them, but significant in terms of posing questions that are challenging, that are pertinent, and can actually be resolved, and that we hadn't previously asked. So I'm going to go back to like one of my first slides and go back to the list of, yeah, there we go. So we have a fair number of plants here in this, that form guilds in Washington. I don't think I missed any, at least within the bounds of my experience. But I think that there are enough there that you can all go out and identify these species and know that there are a certain number of species that are associated, butterfly species that are associated with them. And when it comes to buckwheats, if you can identify which buckwheats are important, then you can really make hay. Now, do you have any questions? Do I have to unmute, or do I don't know what happened. Usually I have some kind of a box that I can go to.
There is one question on the chat that says, ask John about Coliferous perplexia.
Oh, great. Now, why would somebody do something like that to me? Is it even?
It wasn't my question.
What, can you spell
Yeah,
that?
guilty. It's scary.
Oh, you rascal.
It's
Yeah.
C-A-L-L-O-P.
Coliferous, yeah, perplexa.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Perplexa is a name that got discarded because a collection of authors, including yours truly, made a petition to the ICZN, the International Commission of Zoological Nomenclature, to reinstate Dumatorum. So Perplexa is, at best, a subspecies of Dumatorum. It's certainly not.
Okay, well, I worked on one from Washington and also one that Gordon Pratt gave me from his bailiwick. Is that the same bug?
Yes. It is.
Okay, so no perplexa or anything like that.
No.
These are all Dumatorum.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Can I take this off of now? Man, I can't even figure out how to get this off of the screen. Maybe I'm doing things. Oh, I think I am. I'm doing things wrong.
Oh, nice ear.
What the heck? Well, guys, I'm lost.
John, you stopped sharing. So if you go,
I have.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Oh. And if you go in the upper right of your screen, you can change the view to gallery, and then you can see everybody.
I'm trying.
Do you see something that says view in the upper right?
No.
No.
This is like horrible. I see John's face. Yes. Oh, so I did stop the video. Oh, presto changeo. I got something. All right. Looking good. Any more questions? Do I need to mute anything, or do you need to unmute anyone that wants to? Oh, there's the chat box. All right. Okay. Coliferous perplexa. Oh, it's Allison that asked about the checkered skippers in Oregon. Any more questions?
I have another question.
All right.
So my question is for species that are mimics of each other. So the California sister and Lorquin's admiral, and I would say that the silver spot skipper is in that group because many of them have confused me thinking that there was a Lorquin's Admiral next to me and it turned out to be a silver spot skipper.
Uh-huh.
So I'm wondering if any of the plants that those are using are going to grow near each other or be the same plant, because the mimicry won't work unless those butterflies are all in the same area.
Well, that's a good question, actually, and it has been studied in the tropics where there's so many more species. And some of those things that you just mentioned do occur in the tropics. Up here in temperate regions, most of the, well, those two in particular, the two different food plants are different, but they're often found in association, like in riparian corridors or forest galleries. So it's more or less fortuitous, although it's not easy. It's not hard to imagine that they would be able to exploit that relationship, you know, and enhance each other's survivorship, incidentally, where they are co-occurring. And that would, you know, anytime you have an advantage, you know, that's a useful thing. If you're struggling against the world and you have a leg up, then yeah. I can't say that I'd ever seen, well, silver spotted skippers have a tendency sometimes to fly a little bit like Lorquin's Admiral, you know, with that flap glide thing, you know, but I'm not sure, I don't know. I'm not sure I'd see that mimicry thing.
It's usually when they're sitting and they take off and you just see a flash.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you go, wait, is that a Lorquin's Admiral? And then no, it's a silver spot. And it only lasts for a couple seconds, but I figure if you're taking off away from a bird, a couple seconds might be all you need.
Yeah, no, that's look, that's why more eyes that we have in the field. I mean, I've experienced this personally. All right. Way back when I started, there was, you know, maybe 5 or 6 of us in the whole state. And now we have, you know, 5 or 6 people going out on a single field trip. And you know, everyone sees something slightly different. Everyone has a different tune. And I'm glorying in the fact that, you know, people see things and report things that, you know, if it was up to me or up to just Bob and me or up to John Shepard and me, we'd never get it done, you know? And so, you know, like if you see something and you think it's a little bit, you know, like, well, that's cockamamie, you know, no, there's nothing, there's no bad questions. Never has been, never will be. You ask a question and you might, you know, might find out something. I think you're right about taking off. A bird is going to attack something that's a stationary target. Most of the time, birds aren't going to make a living trying to catch flying butterflies. So if in fact they're coming to a stationary target and, you know, they flush both of these butterflies and they have a similar flight pattern, even if only one of them, and I think probably only would be the Lorquin's, is toxic, you know, the flight pattern upon initiation of flight could be sufficient to convince the bird like it's not worthwhile, you know. Go on, you guys got some more questions? I know you do. John?
I'm scratching my head trying to think of different plants out here that might also join the group of interesting plant guilds. And so I want to spend my kind of focus and interest on that sort of thing. That's a very cool idea. They're like little cities for butterflies. Can nectar sources also be considered as guilds?
Well, no, that's another thing altogether. But I'm beginning to see that our understanding of nectar, you know, it's advancing. We had, you know, traditional nectar sources that, you know, like some composites, you know, milkweeds and dogbanes and whatnot. But it's and those are always going to be good for a large number of different butterflies. But what I've seen is, like, for instance, yarrow. Yarrow is a plant that, you know, in many different places has very low visitation rate. But on given days, in given places, it's just great. And there's butterflies all over it. And I can never understand why that was. Well, if you take that same kind of principle and apply it over a broader scale, to the extent that you have, you know, different plants being used as nectar in different ecological settings, and those settings are, you know, specific to that plant, and possibly, you know, specific to that butterfly. It may be that it was a function of there only being one available nectar resource in that area, but the butterfly might not survive without that one nectar resource. So therefore, there is a linkage. It's a different question, actually. Okay, so what about those plants? Okay, what is it about these plants? Do you think? Me? Think? That makes them such popular hosts? Well, I went over initially the features. First of all, they have to be nutritionally available, over the life history of the organisms, the butterflies that are using them. They have to be widespread enough to actually have meaning in the sense of a guild. I don't know. I mean, buckwheats, for instance, have a horde of butterfly species associated with them throughout the West. So there are going to be those butterflies that will exploit some buckwheat almost any place where they occur. However, it is interesting to note that there's a lot of buckwheats that really aren't, or as Dave Nunnally, the guy who gets on his knees and pokes through, flower head after flower head. We'll find one caterpillar of Columbia blue, and so these butterflies do use other buckwheats on occasion, but it's really easy to suspect that myrmecophily in buckwheats is really one of the guiding factors. If you have an and association already in place, then you don't have to form one or hope one forms around you. You join that, and that's why a guild in that sense actually is, it would include the ants, I would say. In fact, next time I give this presentation, I'll include ants just for the heck of it. So, all right, see, the patchy, yeah. Yeah, well, diversity always begets diversity. Adaptations, on the other hand, can be fatal. If you become too highly adapted to one particular food plant, or one particular habitat type, then you are subject to being fragile. If that should be upset in some way, if in fact the environmental situations collapse, or one aspect of them does, broad adaptations more typically are characteristic of our fauna. I mean, you look at Washington butterflies in total as they are now. We can be fairly certain that 10,000 years ago, we didn't have the same fauna, and many of the butterflies that are current in our fauna weren't present at all. And probably some that we don't have were. So like we can say that our butterflies really typify adaptation. They go and they come to new habitats, which are themselves in flux as the glaciers recede, as the timberlines, raise. So like you have this characteristic feature of butterflies, periglacial butterflies, that they're used to flux, they're adapted to flux. And you can see that, with the number of butterflies that adapt to burned over areas. I got a piece of good news today. We had big burns over in the Mtanum area last year. That was, kind of a place we studied for a long time. And Caitlin Labar visited the Yakima riverside of one of those burns and sent me a photo of the hillside, and it looked really nice. So, burn isn't always bad. And when you think about it, the difference between a burn and a volcanic eruption is minimal. I think the eruption is worse, but the burn actually creates opportunities for things that may not have had them before. And our butterflies are pre-adapted to being in a sketchy environments, facing novel, ecological situations, and then having to adapt in a myriad ways. And that's why, myrmecophily does play a role in gill formation, because it voids, the task of adaptation. You don't have to, like I say, build an association, an association around yourself. You are able to employ that which already is extant. No, rabbit brush is not a butterfly. Well, that's not true. Sagebrush checker spots will use one species, Anasiosis. one species, but that's the only butterfly that I know of that uses that. Okay, so the question was, why is it that brassicaceous plant aren't gill plants? That's because gill plants are individual species of plants. Brassicaceae are widely used by a wide number of taxa and often in the same place. So like Becker's whites, they'll use Descarania, they'll use Cicimbrium, they'll use Thelipodium in the same place. And so like they're not really gills at all. They're just available resource. Same thing, with nectar in a lot of cases. There's some nectar plants are actually specifically used by certain butterflies. And oftentimes it's in places that they are linked to a habitat type and they're actually restricted. Maybe both the butterfly and the nectar source are restricted. But others, are just generalists, right? I mean, milkweed, what won't use milkweed, various asters, certainly rabbit brush in the fall. Whereas the food plant gills are very specific. I was able to delineate the number of species that occur on these plants. And in some cases, I can even define the advantage to those species, if there's an association or if the plant is like vigorous. I mean, like really, Ceanothus velutinus, the mountain balm, who wouldn't jump at that? Northern buckwheat, who wouldn't jump at that? I mean, that's a, like I want to use that one, and so like it's an interesting, question as to why this doesn't happen more broadly, why some buckwheat don't seem to be. I mean, there could be a very simple chemical reason that they don't have the right stuff, whatever it is that the stuff is that the butterfly needs to have to oviposit or feed, or it could be something as obscure as that the just slightly the bloom time slightly offset or what have you. And that's another thing about gilled plants is that we talked about the northern buckwheat. Well, there's plants, there's butterflies that use the leaves, and they don't really care about the flower heads at all. So they will eat the leaves, whether they're coming out, as adults laying eggs on the leaves and then feeding to maturity, or like in the blue copper, where they emerge from the egg in the spring and begin feeding on the leaves. And there's enough resource there to support, that butterfly. And, likewise, what's interesting to me is elatum, the tall buckwheat. There's a buckwheat that's kind of a basal, floret of leaves that's, it's substantial. And I got to say, though, that by the time you get into August and September, I mean, I'd hate to have to make a living off of those things. They're kind of tough and leathery. But, the flowers remain available. And as a result, this is probably another topic for another conversation, but the Columbia blue uses both the tall buckwheat and the northern buckwheat, but not in the same way. It can use northern buckwheat very, very well. It's a great plant for it, but it only has a short time, a blooming period for it to do so. It can use the tall buckwheat all summer long, and it does. And these often are adjacent to each other habitat-wise, but tall buckwheats are usually in more xeric habitats, and northerns are more in forested habitats. So there's like little kinks here and there. Every butterfly species, in fact, even cabbage whites, end up having, peculiarities that would make them worth a topic for conversation. So everything's different. Every time you have a conversation about a butterfly species, it's slightly, different from the last one. Becker's white's not like the checkered white's, not like the spring white's, not like, the veined white or the margin white. So, these gills actually do have a functional purpose. We can talk about food plant gills. When you walk into a habitat, you can look and see how many gill plants there are around. You can almost predict what the inventory is. Oh, another. Yes, I did include willow. I included coyote willow, and I believe that it had 5 species on it. Good to see you, Dave. You back from Texas, huh?
Hey, John, I'm still in Texas.
Oh,
Yeah.
As for 9-bark and ocean spray, actually, if I could prove that brown elephants use ocean spray, they would have 3. Because pale swallowtails use them. Celestrina argiolus, Celestrina echo azure uses them. And I've seen brown elephants hanging with them, but I've never beaten a larva off of it. And I've never, found one on it. But that is just below the limit. We have a 3 limit. Dave, good to hear from you, man. You having fun seeing birds?
Yeah, there are a lot of birds. No butterflies.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
All right. So
why would I come here?
well, you said that. I mean, you know what I was thinking, but okay. So chokecherry. Now that's one that I might have to look at. We've got the coral hair streak. We've got multicaudatus. Every once in a while, you'll get a Lorquin's Admiral. Every once in a while, a pale swallowtail on that. I had to kind of sit on that and think, well, like what else is used in that? It's not really, a gilt food plant, but that's a reasonable suggestion. It's something to look at. And of course, I've already changed this from my original presentation because Stuart, pointed out to me that, nettles really are a gilt plant. So, yeah, Dave, I included nettles as a gilt plant now because there are, 4 species that use it.
Yeah, good.
Okay, I'm trying to see if I got any more messages.
I got a question.
All right.
I had learned that not only those 4 species use stinging nettles, but that the painted lady, Vanessa Cardui, can use it. I don't know how often they do, but I heard they could.
Yeah, well, painted ladies are problematic on 2 counts. One is they don't call them the cosmopolitan butterfly because they're picky. We document, Vanessa Cardui arriving in Washington, early in the year. It used to be May, now it's getting to be March, but at any rate, and they will lay eggs on lupin, and they will mature. That first brood will mature on lupin. They won't lay eggs in the second brood, on lupin. There's a host of other, composite plants, or Asteraceae. So I would, I'll add that as a plant that could be occasionally used. To me, I was being a little bit, generous to give West Coast ladies standing as members of that guild. The only problem is that they're repeatedly, either reported or recorded on nettles, and so to exclude them seemed, prejudicial. Come on, man. Hey, Carl, how you doing? All right. Any more questions? David, you guys have Dave Myers? No. Mariah, everybody else left? Oh, well. Well, there's no more questions then.
Hey, John, Jim Reed here down at Klieg.
Yeah.
I seem to see a lot of Eriogonum, the northerns, buckwheats, and about half of them you listed there, but I don't see hardly any of the gilder butterflies on there. Is there any thought you might have on that? We haven't been spraying lately.
Well, Kaylin was just down in Dog Creek the other day, and she got Sheridan's associated with it. I have reared lupini and Columbiae off of it from near Dog Creek, so that's historically some of the species. From Klieg, I have not reared blue coppers, but that is a candidate species. I don't know. There's also the X factor, which is like, why are we having such a cold spring? why is it a sunny day in 40 degrees? I go out in Seattle on an April day and the sun is out, it's usually a nice day. I did that this year, and I went out with, maybe it wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I went out with a t-shirt and it was cold. So I think there's things going on that, that we don't understand. I don't know that we can blame spraying or even try to. It could also be something that, like there's cycles of abundance, like each species could have a different cycle of abundance. Like maybe one species would have a 3-year cycle, another a 5, another, a 2 or a 7. Well, if they all cycle in 1 year at the low end of that cycle, then all of them would seem like, abnormally scarce, and vice versa. They all cycle up 1 year, they'd all be extraordinarily abundant. But that's just speculation. I don't know. I have heard a number of people in California, in Arizona, complaining that, that everything looks right. The plants are just right. Everything is right, but there's no butterflies. So who can say? Not me.
There's a good question there for you.
Oh, yeah. Any grass is a gill plant. Well, that is interesting. I don't know. The reason is, I don't really have the ability to identify very many grass species. I haven't specialized in doing so. And I know I can run through and identify probably 25% of the commoner species. I can, get through Festucas and Elymus, or it used to be Elymus. And I can do some of that. But the interesting thing when it comes to the species that use grasses, which are, the branded skippers and the satyrs, they just don't seem to care. Green seems to be the primary, feature that they're looking at. Is it green? Can we eat it? Okay, durability, of course, like there's some skippers, like you could find Oclodus sylvanoides associated with what used to be called Elymus, the big ryegrass out in the Columbia Basin, because it's so nasty and coarse that it lasts into August and it has something to eat. Well, that's a function of like, well, what's there? Like if you lay your eggs on something that's not going to be there in 5 weeks, then you're not going to be there either. So that's, but that's not a guild either. That's a single species, on a single plant. I would have a hard time thinking that there's very many, if there are any, guild grass species here. Now, when you get into the prairies, I know that there are. There's several. Now, Budolua gracilis, I think, is one of them. Out in the prairies that has a number of skippers and satyrs that use it. So, yeah, it can happen someplace, but I don't think it happens here. But the front part of that statement is really important, I don't think. More? Come on, guys. You'll never know when you have me cornered like this. Okay.
Well, okay, John, so I do have a little more complicated follow-up to the question about the grasses. We've been hearing a lot about how insects really need native plants to feed on. And, things like they'll feed on a specific, like a native maple here, but if you bring in an introduced maple, they won't eat that. But if you're saying with the grasses that they're less specialized and all they really care about is it green? What do you think that would do with butterfly, the larvae feeding on non-native grasses? Would they not care still? What do you think?
I can only offer my experience. I have reared all of the grass feeding butterflies that I have reared on non-native grasses, and it doesn't seem to have made a difference. However, there's other reasons to abjure non-native grasses, because they are, they impact the environment, and that has a greater impact on a larger spectrum of creatures. But there's also the caveat that we need to understand is that some non-native species are better for our butterflies, or at least they thought so. Taylor's checker spot, is basically adapted to a non-native European plant, Plantago lanceolata, and it's doing quite well, thank you. And when they have been transplanting populations and they use the non-native plant, they are successful. When they try to force it to use native plants because that seems to be a better idea, they're not successful. Ultimately, you have to make decisions based on individual call. I don't know that we can do much to control non-native grasses. Cheatgrass, crabgrass, those have been around, and I don't see anybody really being very successful, at eliminating them. I don't know what to say about those kinds of things. I'd be interested in knowing if there are, maple feeding butterflies or moths that do not feed on introduced maples. That would be interesting to me. I do know that tiger swallowtail, western tiger swallowtails in Seattle would oviposit on tulip trees in city parks, and tulip trees are toxic to them. They can't develop. They have developmental difficulties in the second instar. So, it's a mixed bag. Every time you have a conversation like that, you have to look at, what can we do? What should we do? If we can't do something, then trying to do something you can't do is a waste of resources.
You just mentioned a species that the tiger swallowtail will lay eggs on, and then the caterpillars will die. You probably are aware that Purus virginiensis, the West Virginia white, can lay eggs on Alliaria petiolata, the garlic mustard, and then the caterpillars die. Would you know if the garlic mustard might be toxic to any of our whites?
Well, I can say I reared salique feeding pierids on garlic mustard in a pinch, and the saliques just fine. Marginalis, margin white, and others are leaf feeders. The Virginian white is a leaf feeder, and it could be that there's toxins there that would kill them, but I don't know that there's a general statement to be made. We discover all kinds of things all the time. The plants that are toxic to some animals in one part of the world aren't toxic to other animals in other parts of the world. So, I don't know.
You say you raised margin whites on garlic mustard?
No, I raised, they were marbles and orange tips.
Oh, marbles and orange tips. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
On the saliques, only the saliques. They're only salique feeders. They don't feed on leaves.
Okay.
Hey, come on, man. You guys dribble them in, but they keep coming. So I'm going to hang until you run out. Or you tell me to leave, one of the two.
I'm going to throw in another question that's not directly related to this, because you mentioned the Taylor's checker spot using the Plantago lanceolata. I have my best crop ever of sea blush, Plectridis congesta at Lincoln Park now. I had once heard that had been used as one of the Taylor checker spot hosts. Do you know?
Let me say this. I have never personally recovered larvae in any stage or egg clutches, on that plant. To me, when I was growing up and the prairies were rich and, like they aren't anymore, I never even saw Plectridis. I didn't recognize it. It had to be pointed out to me. So I don't know. I know they're trying to get Taylor's checker spot to like Plectridis, and that would, ease the minds of people who, would like to see a natural prairie, a restored prairie, void of Plantago lanceolata. To me, it seems more important that we try to save the Taylor's checker spot. And if they want to eat Plantago lanceolata, I say feed it to them. And that's just my view.
It's really only because I like to say what's cool about my plant in Lincoln Park that doesn't have an e-tail check response.
Well, you could maybe try to transplant some. I'm just kidding, of course. You know. Any more?
Yeah, John, I sent you a chat. What about the Oregon white oak or the California white oak, Quercus gariana?
Yeah, well,
it's got some interesting ant groups associated with it.
Yeah, no, there's something going on with that tree that goes beyond butterflies, though. We only have one butterfly documented to use it. We think that California sisters, use it, so that'd be 2. So it wouldn't be a guild, at least in this state. We get further south into California, you might run into that. Although the gold miners or gold hunters hair streak may actually use, the Gary oak. So I don't know. I love oaks, and I'm always, like excited to get into country where, they have 2 or 3 species of oaks in a forest. I actually went crazy down in Arizona. I got up into Mount Graham, and I was seeing like all these different kinds of oaks everywhere I went, and Andy Warren tells me that down in Mexico, they have full-grown oak trees that are 6 inches off the ground, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think Propertius dusky wings using it here in Oregon.
Propertius uses it.
Yeah, Propertius and California sisters, I think, are the 2.
But also there's a little moths are using it too, because we had one trimmed in our yard and had plenty of time to look in the branches, and there are all kinds of little bitty caterpillars. So if you want to include moths, like a Lepidoptera guild tree.
I got a stomach ache. Moths are beautiful things, and I understand their attraction. There's more discoveries to be made, more distributions, but we've already, we lost John Shepard to moths. He fell into the dark side and has failed to return. If you started building guilds, including moths, you would find a lot of the same plants actually involved. For instance, northern buckwheats have this pistol case bearer, a coleophorid moth, which is characteristic. And they used to drive me nuts because I don't know if you know what a pistol case bearer is, but the larvae build a case out of their own poop, and they carry it about with them, and it sort of protects them. And these moth larvae, when they bore into the leaf through the leaf membrane, and they eat a hole around the hole that they bored, and it makes a little it looks like a target, a hole with an area around it, and that exactly mimics licandid larvae eat marks. So I'm sitting there looking for licandid larvae, and I see one of these pistol case bears, and I just wanted to go. But that's very characteristic. I would suspect that if you included moths, that you would build not only additional guilds, but you would build some of the guilds that we talked about tonight even more robustly. Can I say more robustly? Is that an appropriate phrase? I just did, right? Hey, Dan. Did you know Kayla went out and got a whole bunch of, or photographed a whole bunch of those Lucias?
Yeah, I saw a few of those photos tonight.
Isn't that something?
Pretty neat. Yeah.
You're more famous than you were.
Good goodness.
Oh goodness.
It'll only last 5 more minutes.
Well, maybe we'll find something else for you to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Send me out there. Twist my arm.
Yeah, that was hard. Yeah. Any more? We're getting down to, we're near the end. Everyone's bailing, right? So we're cool. We done?
Sure.
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, John, for giving this presentation. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for showing up and all your questions. And yes, I hope everyone has a great night.
It was a pleasure for me. I just love you guys on the east side.
We love you guys too on the west side.
All right, thanks, John.
All right.
Thank
See
you.
y'all. See you later.
John, this is Dave.
Thanks, John. Whoops, sorry, Dave.
I think we lost him.
Oh.
That's okay. Goodbye all.